Welcome to this presentation. My name is Brendan O'Rourke, and in this presentation I want to talk to you about elite formation and how it can be quantitatively compared. In particular, I'm drawing on work I have done with my DIT colleagues Dr. John Hogan, Dr. Paul Donnelly and Dr. Sharon Feeney. Elites and their formation. There's been a revived interest in elites across the social sciences and in public debate, and this is in recent years, and this is particularly the case since the onset of the Great Recession in 2007. During the 2007-2008 crisis, it became very clear that small groups of powerful individuals were making key decisions in how the economy should be run. And for instance, in how public funds should be given to various companies like private banks, or in the United States, motor companies. So I think there's a natural interest in these small groups of powerful individuals, or elites. Now, you can explore a lot of aspects about elites. You could look at how they make decisions. You could look at whether you need to confine some decisions to such small groups in the first place. But the kind of area that this presentation addresses is to ask, how are those elites formed? And again, you could ask different questions about how elites are formed. You could study how particular elite institutions educate or their members, or particular values that they instill in their members. So you could study that, and I think that would be very interesting and useful. But what we're focused on here really is just to get a sense of how those elites are formed, in the sense of what institutions are involved and how concentrated, if you like, are those systems of elite formation. And in one way, our interest in that comes from a number of questions, but probably the easiest question to think about is it the case that elites are formed through a meritocratic struggle between people of diverse backgrounds competing with each other in a way that ensures the best, or the cream, rises to the top? Or are certain formation institutions essentially concealing social selections under the guise of excellence or technical selection, and legitimating those reproductions of the social hierarchy by doing that? In other words, if elites are the cream of society, is that cream there because it's the best for making key and important decisions? Is it cream in that sense? Or is it cream, as Oscar Wilde put it, just in the sense that they happen to be rich and thick? Okay. Now, obviously, that phrasing of the question is ignoring a lot of the subtleties, but it gives you, I suppose, a sense of why it might be so important to find out, how elites are formed. Is it the case of the formation of elites are decided very early in life, by which, say, post-primary school you attend, or even primary school you attend? Or is it decided later in life, when maybe you have a chance to, show how good you are in respect to other people at particular tasks? So we're kind of interested in that, and that's why we were looking at elite formation institutions. Of course, we're not the only people to look at elite formation institutions, and there's been a lot of work, particularly since the crisis, but even before the crisis. There was an excellent book published in 2007 by a guy called Hartman on elite formation systems in Europe. And, for instance, he was able to point out that 2 of France's recent presidents and 6 of 11 prime ministers have been alumni of particular grand écoles. And he also pointed out that 3 other prime ministers had attended one of the other grand écoles. So, elite formation seems to be influenced, at least from those, if you like, factoids that Hartman provides, heavily influenced by which grand école you go to. Elite formation in the UK, well, our own evidence is talking about work I'm doing with Dr. Feeney and Dr. Hogan, is that 11 of the 14 post-World War II British Prime Ministers had either gone to Oxford or Cambridge. And in earlier work that I did with John Hogan and Paul Donnelly, we saw that 47 of 340 British Prime Ministers had are alumni or were alumni of the fee-paying post-primary school called Eton. I think many people have heard of Eton, that exclusive so-called public school in the United Kingdom. And, you know, we're not the only one to point out this kind of figure. Back to Hartman again, he looks at 29 UK public schools that make up a very exclusive fee-paying school set called Eton and Rugby groups, which are attended by only 1 in 2,000 of the population. But despite that exclusivity, since 1945, the percentage of permanent secretaries of the cabinet who attended public schools has remained constant at over 60%, regardless of the party in power, reaching a maximum of over 66% in the years 1979 to 1994. Okay, so that's that does suggest that those kind of factoids from our work and from Hartman's work does give an impression, if you like, of elite formation taking place quite early in life, but you know, it does that almost by giving us telling examples. And in fact, there's so much going on with those numbers, particularly if you look at the last paragraph of this slide. You'll see there's a lot to keep an eye on. How many schools, how rare is attendance at them, and then how influential are they in particular cabinets and in particular elite groups, if you like. So there's a lot to keep an eye on. And what we try to do in composing our eliteness index was produce a summary measure of all these numbers that are kind of hard to keep an eye on, so we could more easily compare elite formation systems. To produce that summary measure, our approach to measuring and comparing elite formation systems starts by breaking down eliteness of a formation institution into influence and exclusivity of the institutions of that system. Now, the influence of a formation institution could be great, but without exclusivity you don't have eliteness. So the two components are really, reinforce each other, both required to produce eliteness. So, while the majority of people in elite positions in Ireland today were raised Roman Catholic, and you could argue from that Roman Catholic formation was very influential on elites, and you'd be right. I think it would be kind of silly to argue that Roman Catholic formation was an elitist formation system in Ireland, because after all, when people who are of the age that they're in elite positions today in Ireland were growing up, 85% plus of the population were Roman Catholics. So you could hardly argue that their formation was elite simply because they were Roman Catholics in Ireland at that time. Of course, being Roman Catholic and having a Roman Catholic formation may very well be elitist in other times and places, but it would be silly to argue it for Ireland, because exclusivity is required for eliteness as well. And again, exclusivity could be great, but you mightn't have much influence, and that would mean there was no eliteness. I mean, think of the people that appear every year on our newspapers on January the 1st. People born at, say, a minute past midnight on January the 1st usually are celebrated in that way. And, it's a very exclusive club, but I don't think we have any evidence that it's a very influential club. So for eliteness, we need a bit of both. Okay, so I've been saying how both influence and exclusivity are required for eliteness. But by isolating influence and exclusivity, we can actually start putting numbers on what makes up eliteness. So I'm going to define the influence of an institution as depending on how many of its affiliates are members of the elite societal group concerned and the fewness of such institutions. For example, the number of Eton past pupils that are members of the British Cabinet. That would be an influence measure of the particular institution called Eton. Okay, and exclusivity can be defined in a way that can be counted as well. An exclusivity of an institution is the degree to which being socialised there is a common experience, e.g. the proportion of all students attending Eton. Okay, so using this basic insight that what we mean by eliteness of a formation institution is made up of influences or influence of that institution and the exclusivity of that institution, we came up with an eliteness index, but that was also connected with an influence index and an exclusivity index. So I'm going to have a look at our influence index first. Our institutional influence index. Well, to measure the influence of a formation institution, we count MI, the number of affiliates of the IT institution that are members of the elite in question. So we count how many of Oxford alumni became members of the UK Cabinet, and we relate this to the total number of members of the UK Cabinet. And that would give us the influence of Oxford. But then we repeat that for every institution of higher education. And once we've got the shares of each institution, we square them and then add them up as described in the formula on the slide. Okay, and when we do that, we get our institutional influence index, and that varies between 0 and 1. And if, for example, there are fewer schools producing the elite, that index will rise and go towards 1, whereas if you have more institutions involved, that index will go towards 0. Those of you who studied industrial economics or international economics will recognize this as an adaptation, a fairly forward adaptation of the Herfindahl index of industrial concentration. You might also be familiar, if you have studied ecology, there's similar indices in biology as well. Now, our exclusiveness index. Our exclusiveness index is a little more complicated and involved a little more playing around with its form than simply adopting the Herfindahl index. And what we do to measure exclusivity of formation institution is we count PI, the number of the relevant general population in the ith institution, P, the number of the relevant general population, and N, the number of institutions. So we're relating how many higher education students there are in the country, the number of students in each higher education institution, and then we relate this to the number of institutes of higher education according to the formula you see on the slide. And again, this produces an index that moves between 0 and 1. And if, for instance, an elite institution of higher education, like say Andrews, halves its intake, then the that X exclusivity index is going to rise. Okay. Now, to get the eliteness formation index of a formation system, you need to put together the individual elements of our influence and exclusivity index, and you need to do that at the institutional level before adding them all up. And you do it according to the formula that I give on the slide here. And again, that gives a lovely measure that goes between 0 and 1. And if the numbers goes towards 1, you have things like fewer institutions involved, or experience of influential institutions being more exclusive. So it's what you'd expect from the sense of what is meant by eliteness. That figure will vary between 0 and 1. Now, this formula can be applied to give you a summary measure of the eliteness formation of any elite group you care to study, with any elite formation system you care to study. So you could, I've been talking mainly about the political elite in the sense of members of cabinet, because that's what I'm working with Dr. Feeney and Dr. Hogan at the moment. And but you could apply it to any elite group. So a student of mine, for instance, at the moment is thinking of looking at the chief executives in Ireland of Irish companies and seeing, where they went to secondary school. And that, again, you could get a summary figure of how elite that formation system was. So you can apply it all over the place, and I hope you do. And to help you do that, you might find these references useful. You can see there a paper in 2015 that describes the method more formally in politics, and I'm working with Dr. Feeney and Dr. Hogan on a paper concerned with higher education systems in Ireland and the UK. So you might find that useful. And if you're stuck, you're most welcome to contact me if I can be of help to you in working with this index. Thank you very much for listening.